I'm also, I have the privilege of being joined now by Brahma Chelani, whose column today I referred to in my opening take on this show. Mr. Chelani, always a pleasure. Thank you for your time and thank you for joining me here on India Today. I wanted to just quote couple of things from your column, Mr. Chelani, because this is perhaps one of the most thought-provoking pieces we've read in 10 days of this current India-Canada flare-up. You talk, Mr. Chelani, of how the shielding of these militants by the English-speaking West can in some ways be seen as a strategic investment by these countries for leverage against India. And therefore, even though the Khalistan issue has virtually no resonance here in India, or indeed with the global Sikh population, including in Canada, this is what it actually boils down to, strategic leverage to be used at some point against India, sir.
That is the main concern, because Ottawa appears to have learned no lesson from the 1985 Air India flight bombing. That bombing happened because Trudeau, Justin Trudeau's father, shielded dreaded Sikh terrorists, including the Babar Khalsa chief, who, according to Canadian inquiries, went on to become the mastermind of the Air India flight bombing. So now, in a way, history is repeating itself, and Canada has become the global hub of the Khalistan movement. It's quite apparent that Canada is receiving support from the United States, not just to the political and diplomatic level, but also in terms of intelligence cooperation, and also the US is backing Canada in its diplomatic spat with India. The larger issue is this, that when you make an allegation against a foreign government,
yes,
and if you look at the past record of countries that have alleged the role of foreign agents, they have been first very meticulous in gathering video, audio, or forensic evidence before making any kind of allegation. And second, even when they present video, audio, or forensic evidence, they have refrained from directly linking the foreign agents with the government they represent, so as not to preclude the involvement of rogue elements. For example, when the UAE reported the assassination of a Hamas commander in a Dubai hotel in 2010,
yes,
it spent weeks painstakingly collecting a trove of evidence before publicly releasing a very compelling surveillance footage and also the photographs of the identified killers, but without linking them to the Israeli government or to Mossad. That is the way. But here, Trudeau makes an evidence-free allegation and he casts direct blame on the Indian government.
Yeah.
This has never happened before. First, there is no evidence. Not a single arrest has been made in the case. The police and the other investigators are still searching for evidence. So in his rush to reach a conclusion, he stands up in Parliament and makes a damning allegation against another country. And at home, he is facing increasing heat for still not supporting his allegation with any hard facts.
Mr. Chelani, my second question to you would be, given that many of these countries, the United States in particular, see India as a quote-unquote bulwark against, the aggression of China, why would these countries need this kind of strategic leverage against India? Where is India a threat to these countries, sir? Could you explain that?
It's a good question. The paradox is this. At a time when a pro-West tilt is clearly emerging in Indian foreign policy, these Anglosphere countries seem to be using these Khalistanis that they shelter and shield as potential leverage against India. The long-standing US foreign policy has been to seek a balance of power and to balance any emerging power.
Yes.
That's been the long-standing policy. It has nothing to do with the emergence of any country in recent years. So by using, let's say, the Khalistanis as leverage, it becomes a powerful tool in their hands. even if they are playing into the hands of Pakistan, whose agenda clearly is to destabilize India.
Yeah.
And the ISI agency of Pakistan is clearly financing and providing other aid to the Khalistan movement, including providing military training. Nijjar was an ISI-trained terrorist who went on to set up his own training camp near Mission in British Columbia.
Correct.
So, unintentionally, by shielding these dreaded terrorists, these Anglosphere intelligence agencies are implicitly aiding and abetting Pakistan's agenda against India.
Which brings me to my final question, Mr. Chelani, is, now the big picture. Your column, educates many of us about this strategic leverage that these countries have, even at a time when, India is an emerging power in the region and the world, etc. We've just seen the G20 happen as well. My final question to you would then be, sir, how does all of this end? Is this going to be some kind of an inflection point as far as all of these countries protecting wanted terrorists by India? We do know the immediate acrimony between India and Canada will have to play itself out diplomatically. But the larger issue that you raise, do you believe that something will change given the attention that's now being paid to it?
First, Shiv, this has been a long-standing problem.
Yes.
It goes back to the early 1980s. This problem, far from easing, has only accentuated with Canada now becoming the global epicenter of the Khalistan movement and people like Pannu operating freely out of American and Canadian territories. The question we need to ask ourselves, how is it that important countries that talk about a rules-based order allow dreaded extremists who openly endorse violence as a tool to achieve Khalistan to operate with impunity from their soil? Obviously, there is an unholy nexus between such terrorists and certain intelligence or security agencies. So the question really is about the Indian government's willpower. We have in India, we have a short memory. For example, in March, when Khalistani stormed the Indian High Commission in London, remember the outrage in India?
Yes.
And there were these calls that India should freeze negotiations over a free trade agreement with Britain. But within a couple of months, we were again becoming pally with the Brits. Our talks with the Brits on an FTA are proceeding, and in fact, when Prime Minister Rishi Sunak came here, he received a big hug from Prime Minister Modi. So 6 months down the road, will the government of India will it still be putting pressure on the Canadian government? That's a question basically that we Indians need to debate domestically, because as long as India is unable to sustain pressure on these countries who have been for decades now sheltering and shielding terrorists and extremists from India, using them as leverage against India, and the kind of horrendous attacks that have happened in the past from their territories. I mentioned the Air India bombing, but there was even a murder of an Indian diplomat in Birmingham in the UK. Imagine if a Western diplomat gets murdered by extremists that India shields. What would be the reaction? Or if India were to shield separatists from Quebec, gun-toting separatists from Canada who engage overtly in anti-Canada activities from Indian territory and espouse violence against the Canadian state, how would the Western world react? No, but for last 40 years or so, India has put up with such activity on Western soil. By Western soil, I mean on the soil of these 5 Anglosphere countries. This can only end if India uses its leverage. India has trade, political, and diplomatic leverage. India sends students to all these countries in a
Yes.
major way. The universities in these Anglosphere countries depend on Indian students for their financial sustenance. Indian brains are very critical to the technological base of these countries.
Absolutely.
India is contributing to innovation in these countries. India has leverage, but the question that India needs to ask itself is that this may be an inflection point.
Right.
But is India willing to keep them under pressure? They should be asked to start cleaning up their act at home.
Absolutely.
In their own interest, but also because this is detrimental to India's core security.
Absolutely. This is something that we're going to keep our focus on, because this story is certainly not over. I'm going to end on that very sober note. Mr. Chelani, always a pleasure. Thank you very much for being with India Today and taking our questions. I urge all of our viewers to read Brahma Chelani's column in Open Magazine. It's out there. It's across social media as well. Very, very thought-provoking, and provides a perspective on how there are bigger things than just this immediate face-off between India and Canada. It's a bigger issue that India needs to think about. Shortage of memory, perhaps shortage of strategic stamina has in the past meant that these things simply evaporate after a few weeks. Could this be an inflection point? We'll have to wait and see. Brahma Chelani, thank you very much for being with me here on India Today. Thank you.